New Zealand's going, as you know, Health New Zealand's going through restructuring, so yeah, a month behind and everything. So I work for the local public health unit. Yeah, so and our goal is to support people to be as healthy and as well as they can, and to also provide support to ensure that our communities look and health is accessible to all. So part of my role is around supporting active transport, which is walking and cycling, and this is the third time that we have partnered with the councils across the coast to bring Dr Rod Tolley to our areas. He's a guru in connected communities by focusing on walking in particular, but cycling is in there as well. So I'd like you all to welcome Rod, and we'll be happy that you came and live.
Thanks, Rosie. Lovely to be here again. Before I start, may I just give some thanks to Rosie for her support to the organisation and getting sponsorship and so on for these for this visit, which is wonderful of her. So thank you for that. Thank you, Diane, at the back there, for all your technical wizardry for getting this going. And thanks, Carl, also for your hospitality this afternoon and for guiding us around the delights of Tiffany. Very enjoyable afternoon. Okay, I'm going to crack on because we've got relatively little time. We're a bit getting underway. So what I'm going to try and do is speak for maybe 35 minutes, something of that sort, and leave a good watch of time for questions and discussion afterwards. Whether I achieve that or not, I don't know. If you all start falling asleep and toppling off your chairs, I know I'm not doing very well, but I will try to keep an eye on the clock and try to get this wrapped up by about 6:20, which is 35 minutes, and we see where we'll go from there. Okay, my background, I'm not going to say very much about it. I represent, if you like, Walk 21, which is the international organisation that supports the professionals for delivering best practice in walking in cities across the world. I also run a small consultancy called Dr Tolley Walks. And what I want to do is I want to give a presentation is what I want to do. And it's stuck again. We need a bit of coal, is it really now on top of Diane? Yeah? Okay, let me just talk for a moment while Carl's trying to rescue that. My background is an academic in the UK, but I now live in the US, in Western New York, near Buffalo. And my work is no longer at university. I'm an independent. And for the last 3 years during COVID, I've been sitting and staring at a screen, same as everybody else has. This is my first actual engagement with human beings for 3 years, which feels quite strange at times. It's lovely to be back. We're okay. We're going to try it again. Let's see what happens this time. Okay. My recent past, though, has been engaged in some research with various people concerning bigger picture issues relating to walking and cycling. As Rosie said, that's been my background. I've been 40 years as an academic and a writer and a researcher and a presenter and so on in that kind of walking and cycling space. And there are many cyclists in the room, I know, and that's great, and I'm fully supportive of what you do, and I'm a cyclist as well. But it always seems to me that walking has actually fallen down the cracks, that we really just kind of plan for cycling, but we never plan for walking. We just assume it happens. And in my view, from what I've seen around the world, is that that's not adequate. We have to plan specifically for walking to happen, and I'm going to touch on some issues that relate to that today. So my immediate work has been in writing this book in particular, Slow Cities, Conquering Our Speed Addiction for Health and Sustainability, and that came out 3 years ago. And it really was a challenge to the established orthodoxy that going faster gives us a better life. And for a whole variety of reasons, we think we were able to show in that book that actually going faster has made our lives much worse. And in three particular regards. One is in human health, Secondly, in economic health, and thirdly, in environmental health. So it was a broad picture painted in that book, and what we're now doing is moving on to focus down on one particular issue, which is becoming to be dominant for all of our lives now, which is the climate crisis. So I want to look, we are looking at, as the research for this book, about the specific impact of travelling fast and what that means for greenhouse gas emissions and what it's likely to mean for New Zealand's role in the future of reducing its emissions to acceptable levels. So that's by way of background. But I do need to provide perhaps a definition of what I mean by slow cities here. Because slow is a very pejorative term, isn't it? If you say somebody is slow, you think that's not a very good thing to be. We're arguing exactly the opposite. We live time-pressured, high-speed lives, and what we're arguing is that a system of transport that slows us down and allows us to have better health individually, but to engage with our community and our family and friends, will give us a more textured and richer life as a result. So what is the slow city? Well, let me just perhaps put up a couple of different conceptualizations of the city. You might think about how you live in the city and ask the question, how far can we go? That's a reasonable argument. Can I live in a city where we can travel a lot, where we can see a lot of different places? If you do, you're living in a city which is a mobile city. You're talking about the concept of mobility, and that's the kind of landscape you might get from that kind of thinking. It is very, very mobile for a small number of people. All the people in these vehicles are having extreme mobility, hypermobility. They can travel almost anywhere to reach almost any activity. But of course, if you're not in those vehicles, then you're not getting mobility. You are actually locked out of that system. So it's a very inegalitarian system, very effective for those who get benefits from it. But is there a different question we can ask? Instead of how far we can go, can we ask how much stuff can we actually get to? As a question, as a desire out of the city. And if we do that, we're talking about the concept of accessibility. And if we're trying to think about, these people are all trying to get accessibility, but it's a long way away. But ideally, accessibility happens around the corner. If you live in a place which is highly accessible, you're living somewhere that might look something like this, where things are very close by, and you can get to them by human-powered activity. In other words, by walking or by using bicycles or indeed now scooters. So that's the distinction we're trying to make between the fast city and the slow city, and arguing that this has led to all kinds of problems in terms of health, and that this is a future that we might want to be looking to in order to redeem some of those damages we've done in the past. Okay, let's quickly look at some benefits and disbenefits of fast and slow. And this will be very quick because everybody in the room knows all this stuff. I'm just going to bring it together into a handful of ways of looking at this. We're all familiar with the idea that walking is not only good for us, it's actually the best thing that we can do. Not only because it actually brings huge amounts of physical and mental benefits to us, but it's something that can be maintained for a lifetime. This is a lifetime activity, whereas many other things like going to the gym may not necessarily be so. So GPs all over the world are writing prescriptions now to people who expect a pill. They're not getting a pill, they're getting a prescription to go for a walk, because that is the best thing that GPs are seeing for us to benefit our health. But it's not just about mental health and so on, it's about connection and community, it's about intergenerational benefits, it's about family, it's about neighborhood environments and so on. All of that's part of walking as well. And you may be a little bit confused there because these people are not walking, they're sitting. But as far as I'm concerned, they are sitting walkers. They're just taking a rest between the next bit of their walking day. And that's a perfectly legitimate way of seeing them. And in terms of walking, we've got to remember it's not just about getting from A to B, it's about what happens between A and B that's critically important. Spaces for you to stop and stare and mingle and be with other people are all part of the walking experience. So, physical and mental health benefits of the slow city. What about economic health in the slow city? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it takes a lot of time to go through the detail, but I've been working on this for a very, very long time, and I could point to you to a mountain of evidence that is showing very clearly now that slow cities around the world are bringing economic benefits to individuals and those cities. For example, just think about individuals and families. If you are car free or car light, these things don't bother you because they're not part of your universe. You don't care about the cost of fuel. Why would you? So people who have 2 cars in their family then move to 1 and becoming car light, and they are much less concerned about these kinds of daily pressures on their budgets. But it's not just about daily stuff, it's about long term as well. We know from American research, for example, that if you, instead of owning a car and spending the money on that depreciating asset, if you spent that money instead in a walkable neighborhood where you don't need a car, your house will inflate in price because it's going to be an attractive proposition for other people to buy that. The US research shows that on average, you're going to have a pension benefit of around $2 million at the time of retirement as a result of deciding not to have a vehicle, but to live in a walkable neighborhood instead. So it's a huge benefit to individual families and individual people. So that applies to individuals and families. It applies to businesses. This is the fight you always have with your retailers, who will tell you that it's absolutely essential to have the parking area right outside my shop, otherwise I'll go bust. That's absolute nonsense. There's no evidence from any city that I've ever seen that supports that. It happens to be a comparatively useful myth for retailers to rely on, but it just is not true. And in terms of governance, the city that has low speeds rather than high speeds doesn't have to worry so much about crashes, about road maintenance, about air pollution, about those other things listed there. So there's an economic benefit coming from the slow city as well. Let's turn this upside down for a moment. What about the fast city? What does that bring us? Well, let me just look at environmental issues for a moment. This is the environmental health impacts of the fast city. One of the issues here, please don't read this for a moment, just have a listen for a moment. One of the issues here is that speed isn't what we think it is. We all imagine that if we go faster, what we will do is do all the things we do every day in our lives, and we'll do them twice as fast. And we'll save time. So if somebody gives you a faster car, instead of driving 10 minutes to your home, you'll now do it in 5 minutes. And you'll now have another beneficial 5 minutes to sit down, have a cup of tea and rest. Whoever does that, what happens is, we know, if somebody has a faster car, rather than halving their 10-minute commute, they think, well, actually, I can go twice as far in 10 minutes. They consume the speed benefit in terms of more use of space. And that's the fundamental reason why cities sprawl. Because over the years, transport has got faster, so people have taken that opportunity to travel further. Not the same distance quicker, but further. And in fact, if you look at the comparison between, say, Americans and Europeans, Americans actually travel twice as fast as Europeans every day. They don't save any time. Americans actually spend much more time traveling than Europeans do, because their cities have sprawled so much they now have to go gigantic distances in order to get things that formerly were next door. Does that make sense? So sprawl is a consequence of speed. And sprawl does all sorts of things. More water consumption, more waste disposal, more visual and noise pollution, more air pollution from vehicle usage, reduced forest cover and biodiversity, more food miles, less sponge capacity because of more artificial surfaces, etc. I'll come back to that first line in just a moment. Now, what all of that leads into is what's happening currently in terms of the climate crisis. Because people who are sprawling are travelling much more and they're using more energy, so they're producing more greenhouse gas emissions. But tailpipe emissions are only a part of the problem. What we need to build in here also is the so-called embodied emissions. And these are the emissions that are being created whether you move 1 inch or 100 miles. Doesn't make any difference. These are the plastics, the rubber, the glass, the steel, all of those other things that go into manufacturing a vehicle. And then it's all the things that go into destroying a vehicle afterwards, or breaking it down and replacing it with another one. And that's just the vehicle. Now think about what it is that the vehicle travels upon. It's road, and it's asphalt, one of the most polluting substances known to man. And asphalt involves digging tar out of the ground, heating it up, turning it into something else, digging out lots of stone, mixing them together, bringing them together, and then taking them out and spreading them on the road, and then replacing them 10 years later. That is enormously damaging environmentally, because the greenhouse gas emissions involved in doing that are huge. And it gets worse. This fella here, concrete plant, is the worst of the lot. Because to make concrete, you have to heat cement to this enormous temperature, 600 degrees Celsius, which takes massive amounts of energy. To the point where it emits so much energy from concrete. If concrete were a country, imagine this for a moment, if concrete was a country, it would be the third largest emitter on the planet after China and the US. So when you build a suburb, it's not just, you don't just think about what's coming out of the tailpipe while you drive home in the evening. You have now created a carbon landscape, which is going to be there for generations. So tailpipe and embodied together make up an enormously damaging environment, a consequence of our wish to go faster. Okay, let's move on quickly and say, well, what does this mean for New Zealand? It's not good news. Transport emissions are about 17% of New Zealand's total greenhouse gas emissions, and they're about the only sector that's growing. And they sit in the corner. Most people don't notice them. Most people don't want to notice them. This is the elephant in the room. Everybody's familiar with, emissions from homes and from factories and from farming. Yep, but transport, do we talk about transport emissions and so on? Very little. But these are growing, and we've got to get them going the other way. Carbon tracker, I checked this 2 weeks ago, sorry, 3 weeks ago, sorry, 4 weeks ago now. Policies and action in New Zealand are highly insufficient. The overall rating is poor across a whole range of activities that New Zealand's involved in trying to get its greenhouse gas emissions down. At the moment, if we were all New Zealand, we'd be heading for a world which is going to heat by more than 4 degrees Celsius, which is catastrophic. So we have a major problem here that New Zealand is completely out of step with what is needed around the world in terms of greenhouse gases from transport. Now, Auckland's got a grip on this, sort of, because they've recognised how serious this problem is, and they put forward their transport emissions reduction plan, which was adopted last year, as a way of dealing with it. And the Auckland government, the council, has signed off on reducing transport emissions by 2/3 in the next 7 years. Wow. Nobody else around the world, as far as I'm aware, is even thinking about such an ambitious target. That is an extraordinary idea that you can actually tackle that. Now, whether they can deliver it or not is going to be the issue. But it's there. They've passed that legislation in Auckland. And one of the things that comes out of that to try to achieve this huge reduction is that they say the linchpin of what's going to happen in Auckland is we are going to, quote, supercharge walking and cycling. That's going to be the lead of Auckland into the future, into a low carbon city within the next 6 years and onwards to 2050. So what's happening around the world now is a quite different way in which we're planning for transport. It's called the ASI model. 3 stages. Number 1, avoid motorised trips. That's your starting point. Any planning system will say, how can we plan the city or plan transport in the city to avoid motorised trips? Secondly, The trips that are left, after you've done that, shift them to more efficient modes of transport, that's in energy terms, which is buses and bikes, and they should put a shoe on here as well, because walking is the most efficient of all. So, what's left after that? Improving. And by that is usually meant electrification. So that's your 3 steps. Don't do it in the first place. The motorised trips that are left, shift them to more efficient modes, and the ones that are still left at the end of that, electrify. And by doing those 3 things, not in stages, but in parallel, will be the way that most of the world is trying to deliver the greenhouse gas reductions that we need. Okay, let's try and connect my slow issue here with these greenhouse gas bits, and I'm going to be very quick through this. A couple of questions. What do slow places do? Is this going to bring a benefit to us as individuals? 2 things. Number 1, they reduce road danger. Slow places are safe places. And this, for you in New Zealand, is a serious issue because you're miles out of step with the best in the world. Sad thing to say, but it's unfortunately true. New Zealand road deaths per 100,000 people. Every country in Europe is better, except one. Sweden and Singapore. New Zealand is 5 times worse in terms of deaths per 100,000 people. It's not a good record. In terms of trend, it's not changing very much. So we're not even going in the right direction. If you look at your capital, not capital city, your biggest city, and compare it with Norway's biggest city, for example, in 2018, Auckland killed 18 vulnerable road users, people on foot and bicycle. Oslo, in 2019, killed none. This is New Zealand versus the best. Your aspiration, I hope, is 0, but you're a long, long, long way from it. So, slow places reduce road danger. And I'm going to show you this diagram here because I know everybody has seen this before, but I really want to emphasize how critically important this is. This is this diagram you've seen before. A car traveling at 30 kilometers an hour, potential impact here with mother and child. Car driver has a reaction time of 8.33 meters, then the car is braking, another whatever meters, 12.75 in total. You stop with a hair's breadth to spare before you impact the mother and child. 30 kilometers an hour. What happens at 50? Now, most people will think, oh, well, at 50, your reaction time is going to be a bit longer, your braking time is going to be a bit longer, so you will probably hit them, but not very fast. What actually happens at 50 is the entire distance is consumed by reaction time. And the impact between you at 50 kilometers an hour and your victims will be at 50 kilometers an hour. You will not have touched the brakes. So it's not a question of there'll be a slightly reduced collision speed. It'll be your speed at the start will be the speed you hit them. And the difference is massive. Up here, should you actually hit them, only 1 in 10 will die. Here, if you hit them at 50 kilometers an hour, 80% of them will die. So when we're talking about 30 kilometers an hour and arguments for neighbours and cities, we are talking about a survivable speed limit here and an unsurvivable speed limit here. Let's not don't make any bones about this. This is an unsurvivable speed limit. And if you're setting 50 kilometers an hour, you are deliberately saying somebody will be killed here, but that's part of our policy. So, speed issues are key. How do you get them down? Well, 30 kilometer an hour zones are becoming very, very normal around the world. And what's very interesting is now we're seeing a lot of places around the world going for default 30. In other words, you know how it is at the moment. it's 50 or something unless it says 30. And what these places are doing is saying it's 30 everywhere unless it says 50. Okay, so you don't need lots of signs up there. You don't need to tell people it's 30 because everywhere is 30. But you need the occasional sign to tell them it's 50 on an arterial road or something of that sort. So the whole of Wales is now 30. The whole of Spain is becoming 30. The whole of Wales is 30. It's becoming the norm for delivering 30 kilometres an hour. My colleague Trav from Griffith University in Australia, talking about Australia, but also thinking about New Zealand. Australia has fallen so far behind this agenda it isn't funny. And we're becoming a real outlier. We still think we're giving children safety in a 40 kilometre an hour school zone, when that is just nonsense. Okay, second things that slow places do. One of the things that speed does is it pushes people out of the way onto narrow footpaths. And then it says to them on the footpaths, you are not allowed in this space where the cars are. Go to the corner, stand there, press a button, and wait for us to give you permission to walk across. You're not welcome. We will give you a point when you're allowed to do that. That is fundamentally anti-human, anti-person on foot, but that's the way we do it. What slow gives is space back to be reclaimed it for them to allow them to do other things. And what we want is not Teflon streets, where you can slide people through quickly. We don't want that at all. What we want is the opposite. We want sticky streets, which slow people down so that they can engage with others. They can do all, you put all these things in there, patios, parklets, you should be putting in and coffee taker, all part of making it sticky. Casual seating, pop-ups culture, evening economies, night markets, all of that stuff you need to have in your street space because it attracts people. And once it's attracted people, there's a supercharging effect because those people themselves attract other people. Because the human being's favourite activity is sitting down and watching other people, isn't it? So the more you put people in the space, the more you're going to get other people to come and join in the space as well. So, slow places reclaim space for people. And people who slow down spend money. You can't shake money out of people's trouser pockets or handbags if they're flying through in a car. It doesn't work. If they're wandering through and they sit down, have a nice cream of coffee, chat to their friends and so on, it's not spent. Okay, turn that upside down. What happens if you decide you want lots of car access to your town centre? This is the kind of landscape you'll probably get. Lots of car access, so you need plenty of space for the cars. They're going fast, so you need to rail them off. And now you've got this segregated, imprisoned area where the shoppers are supposed to stand, and they have to go to the corner miles away in order to cross the car space. You've chopped the street in half. She can't drop on the other side of the street now, because she can't get across it. So 50% of the street expenditure has just gone down the drain. You've seriously damaged the street by having this kind of environment. And I don't want to pick on Greymouth in particular, but this happens to be Greymouth, I think 5 years ago, which is very indicative of the idea that actually allowing people in with vehicles into the main retailing core actually brings negative impacts, which actually really seriously damage the economic viability of that space. So how else can you get there if you don't come by car? Well, we can walk, but we need help. You don't just sort of appear from the back of buildings as a pedestrian. You need just the same connected networks to get to your town centres and so on as you would if in a car where you need connected networks of roads. So that means working out where people live, where they want to come from, and how they get to the centre. And you need those networks to be connected, accessible to everybody, related to public transport if you've got any, and making sure that each of your road crossings where pedestrians come up against vehicles are safe for people. So that'll be walking. What about biking? For longer distance movement, this is what the world is doing now. sometimes with barriers, but always separated by space from roads, protected bike lanes. Would be the long arterial roads. This is a long distance bike movement, if you like, from where people live to get into the town centre. And if you do these and connect them together across the city, when these networks are implemented at a citywide scale, their impacts are huge. So this is best practice that we're seeing in South American and African and Indian and Chinese cities all over the place. Chinese cities in particular, we don't realize what's happening, but over 80% of them are now spending enormous amounts of money on slow networks. It's changed utterly from what we still imagine is the norm for China. Okay, you might be sitting there thinking, well, this is all very well for big cities and so on. Does it really relate to small cities and towns? Yes, it does. Not in every detail. But you need to still have the goal of enabling comfortable and safe walking and cycling, especially to your key locations, shops, schools, play areas, parks, bus stops. You need to think in terms of separate pedestrian and cycle networks. Don't use shared paths unless you have to. There's all sorts of issues with them in terms of the sharing of that space between groups of people moving at very different speeds and for different purposes. Sometimes shared spaces work very well, but just be careful when if you put them in, that they're going to work in that particular case. Make sure you go and put them in the right place. You get the data about where people want to walk and bike, review the existing infrastructure, enhance the links, install new links where beneficial. So a policy for small towns or rural areas has basically the same things in that I've been talking about, but fine-tuned for your particular needs. And then make sure you improve the town centre environment as well. Okay, now this shouldn't be coming to you as though it's from outer space, because the New Zealand government has had a consultation on these very matters in the past year. The Reshaping Streets consultation, and it said we need to make it safer and more attractive for people to walk, bike and take public transport, but most streets don't give dedicated space priority to these modes. So the consultation involved 4 ideas: pilots, restricting traffic, school streets, and community streets. Now, most of those don't need much introduction, but let's very quickly say what's meant here. Pilots, or demonstration projects, if you like, are really great. If you don't want to spend $20 million, you want to spend $10.43. And you can do it. Here's one community faced with a wide open area of tarmac, cars everywhere, dangerous, unregulated, difficult. That's the morning, and they did, by the afternoon, with a few pots of paint, they did this. They made a road out of it, they put crossings in, they put umbrellas up, they put painted spots, they put in seats, they put in gardens, they put in trees, they put in fountains, almost nothing. And the idea is, try it. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, it's cost nothing. Take it out. But almost certainly some ideas will come out of it where people will say, hey, that was good. This bit was good, that bit wasn't good. So let's fine tune it and see what comes out of that. So that's your street pilots. Your modal filters, this is dead easy stuff. You've got a neighborhood over here, a residential area, and you want to stop rat running through it, stop cars rat running through it. So just simply put in a couple of build outs and let the bikes through, but make sure the cars go around. They can still access, it's not a problem, but you don't want them driving through. You don't want fast routes going through your neighborhoods. Community streets is about giving the streets back to people who live there. Regular legal closures, car access at walking pace, resident-led and organised, everybody consulted and included, child-led play. This isn't an opportunity for a hockey game organised by mum and dad. This is for the kids to say, great, we're just going to go on the street and play. So very much hands stuff back to the children themselves for the cities they want to live in. Then the last one is the one that probably is really important for you, and you're thinking about, and I know in conversation with Carl today, you certainly are, is the issue of school streets. And this may involve time-limited vehicle-free access areas outside schools, which can reduce road danger. There's lots and lots of these appearing around the world. So instead of managing the parental access in cars, you actually say, no, we just shut the street for opening time in the morning and closing time in the evening, or indeed shut the street for the whole school term and then open it up again afterwards. There's lots of ways you can do that. But start from the principle that traffic does not belong outside school and work from there. And if you don't do that, this is the sort of thing that happens. This is Bailey Middle School in North Carolina in the US, 10:35 in the morning. This is the picture outside. Nothing wrong with that, you might think. But go back again at 3 something in the afternoon, and that's what the same place looks like. And you know what's happening here. This driver does not want to be here. But if you ask this driver why she or he is there, they will say, well, we're here because Billy's in the back and we're protecting Billy from the behavior of these other drivers who are protecting their kids from our driving. It's like an arms race. Everybody protecting against the damages caused by other people. And living as I do in the USA, this photograph is more than 10 years old now. These vehicles are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And many parents are saying, well, it's dangerous out there, so I need a tank. And somebody else is saying, well, it's dangerous out there with that tank, I need a tank version 2, which is bigger than their tank. I mean, this is absurd, isn't it? Absolutely absurd behavior. So we need to be moving on from that, and the school streets issue will be one way of tackling this whole issue of access to school environments by kids. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to move on to my last issue here, and this is a tough one for you. Will you accept that? It's a really hard diagram to understand. I'll try and walk you through it. This is a Washington think tank looking at what kind of urban environments we can design in the future that will meet our necessary goal of 1.5 degrees C of warming as maximum. What will work and what won't work. They worked out the budget for what amount of gigatons of greenhouse gases you can emit. The budget gives you 65 tons of greenhouse gas emissions in a 30-year period. So that's the target. You can't read that, I understand that. Just remember that 65. These are 4 ways of, in theory, getting there. Number 1, business as usual. We keep building cities for cars instead of people. Power use increases. Most cars and vehicles are fossil fueled. Result, 119 gigatons. Remember our target, 65? That's double where we need to be. No, thank you. We're not going to get there with business as usual. That will not work. Second one, called compact cities. We build mixed-use cities focused on public transit, bicycling, and especially walking, but most motor vehicles are still powered by fossil fuels. That gets us down to 86. Good, but not good enough. Third one, electrify everything. All new motor vehicles are electric by 2040, but cities are still built for cars instead of people. That gets it down to 75. A little better still, but still not good enough. That still will lead to a hugely overheating world. What the authors argue here is you've got to put together the best of that one with the best of that one, so you end up with electrified, compact cities, where every vehicle is electric, and where most people are able to walk and cycle to their activities that they need around them. End result, 60. This is the only model here that gets there, and indeed the authors call this one the only way to 1.5 degrees. It's a rather shocking message, but it does indicate the severity of the crisis that we face. Okay, I'm going to move on to the last couple of thoughts. I may be stupid in lots of things that I do, but I don't think I'm stupid in this. And that is that I'm not trying to argue that you should make your life worse in order to solve the greenhouse gas problem. That would be absurd. we've all got to play our part, and you will be sitting there thinking, why would I do something that makes my life worse? I'm not going to do that. So what I'm offering you here is a diet, a menu, which actually makes your life better. Your local economy will be stronger. Reasons I've already said. There'll be urban regeneration because people will be moving into your city because it's going to be much more attractive. City attractiveness will promote tourism, inward investment, the creative class will want to live there, your city branding and identity will be better. So for those reasons, it's going to be a win for you. It's going to be a cost-saving place where your congestion costs will go down, your maintenance and construction costs will go down. And then individuals and families, as I said right at the start, will have great benefits coming out of this. So I've called this the slow city dividend. It's sort of like putting money in a bank or an investment, and after a time you take it out. It's a dividend. You reap your dividends, as the famous guy. So here is a set of outcomes from moving more slowly, which will meet our climate needs into the future. So you can deal with the climate and have a better life. Wow. You know, we've got through that conundrum of how you can solve one without making the other one worse. So what does that actually mean for you? A couple of points here. Lloyd Alter's book, Living the 1.5 Degree Lifestyle, he points out every motorised kilometre uses 32 times as much energy than walking in. I don't think we sometimes realise how big that difference is. That is enormous, isn't it? 32 times more in a car than it is by walking. So he says, get out of your car. It's the biggest single factor of most people's footprints. Note, I did not say get rid of it, but I did say use it as little as possible. So that's the first one. It goes on. Remember, electric vehicles as a phrase includes e-bikes. We tend to think of it as just meaning cars with electric engines. Electric vehicles include e-bikes. E-bikes have done an extraordinary thing around the world. Now, can you believe 75% of every urban trip on the planet is within e-bike distance? Wow, that's not even thinkable 5 years ago. So 3/4 of the planet's journeys can be done on foot or by e-bike. So in order of impact, what we need to be doing is walk if you can, bike otherwise, and then worst of those three would be e-bike, but it's still very, very good. You can't do this on your own though. So how do you work with your community to deliver something that will create benefits? I really think this is an important slide for you because you're on the journey, and it was very encouraging listening to what's happening here today. But this diagram says huge amounts about what we could be and what we could do. This is the percentage of children walking or cycling to school. We stood outside of school today and didn't see any. Japan, nearly 100%. Netherlands, over 90%. Finland, Denmark, Germany, all over 50%. And then down at the bottom here, Australia and the US, and New Zealand's in here somewhere. And in these cases, we're down in about 12%. And there's a lot of differences between these countries, but one key difference stands out. These 5 here all have 30 kilometres an hour as norm around their schools. Australia and the US as a norm have 50 or 40 around their schools. Result, parents say, not letting my kids cycle in that, it's dangerous. So we'll drive them. And that means parents in these countries spend probably 1/4 of their time ferrying children around to activities in schools. This is not even bad for kids' health because they don't get the incidental daily activity of walking and cycling, but they lose contact with other kids. They're much worse at learning when they get to school if they've been driven there. There's plenty of evidence of that. But it's worse for their parents as well. who have to spend all of their time driving their kids around. So this is a disaster for you and is a disaster for your community. And yet we've gone down this rabbit hole thinking this is the normal thing to do. It isn't. There's an opportunity now to turn your schools into 30k zones that will allow you to start planning uptown. It's a fabulous opportunity. Okay, last thing then, what should your council be doing? There's something out there called the International Charter for Walking, and it involves showing you how to do things like designing spaces for people, improving networks, support land use planning, reducing road danger, less crime, culture of walking, and so on. All of those things are in the charter, and your council can take that charter, download it, print it, and get it signed, especially by the mayor, and adopt it as council policy. And that gives you leverage then, because each time a new policy comes through the council, you can say, well, good idea, but how does that fit with the international charter that you signed last week? Is this going to make us more walkable? If the answer is no, then you shouldn't be doing it. So it helps in pushing gently your local authority towards a walkable future. More than 500 mayors around the world have signed it so far. So I'll just finish by saying, what kind of place do you want to live in the future? And the most important advice I can offer is, don't start from where you are. Don't look out the window and think, oh God, we can't do that, it's too hard. You know, the weather's too bad, or too many cars, or whatever. Think instead of where you'd like to live. What's your vision? What's your place that you really want to live? And having got your vision, then try and find a way to get there, which is a much more positive way than looking out the window and being depressed about where you are. And in this case, this is Auckland, and this is somebody's daughter going to school. Is that what you want? Do you want your daughter to be standing in the middle of traffic mayhem as a normal daily activity? Or do you want your daughter, perhaps when she's a little older, agreed, behaving like this? Providing an environment where that's a normal activity instead. I would hope that it is, because it seems to me that that's more the kind of place that all of us would like to live. And while you're thinking about which of these things you want into the future, just bear in mind always the mantra that walkers and cyclists are the indicator species for quality of life in our cities. Okay, thanks very much. Happy to take questions.